We all know the first words of the Bible. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It is a declaration of absolute power and perfect creation. But the very next verse plunges us into chaos. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep. Have you ever truly stopped to question that? Why would a perfect God create an imperfect, broken world? What if He didn't? What if the story we've been told for centuries is missing its first, most crucial chapter? The silence between those first two verses of Genesis is not empty. It is a chasm of forgotten time, hiding a history so catastrophic that ancient scribes chose to erase it. A history of a world that existed long before Adam ever walked in the Garden of Eden. This is not a fairy tale. This is a truth pieced together from clues left behind in forbidden texts and the most cryptic passages of the prophets. Visions in the book of Jeremiah speak of a ruined world with no man in it. Ancient rabbinic traditions whisper of a pre-Adamic race, beings given dominion over the original earth, whose fall was so great it shattered creation itself. This knowledge changes everything we thought we knew about the fall of man. What you are about to discover is a truth that has been intentionally obscured, a divine secret that redefines Adam not as the first beginning, but as a divine restoration. A second chance for a world already lost to a cosmic war the Bible barely dares to mention. If you seek the answers that lie beyond traditional teachings, stay with us. Like this video and subscribe, because the story of what came before Adam is about to be revealed. The perfect world of Genesis chapter 1 verse 1, the ruined world of Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. Theologians call it the gap theory, a desperate attempt to explain the chasm between perfection and chaos. But what if it isn't a theory? What if it's a scar, left behind by an event so monumental that its full story was deliberately removed from the sacred texts? The evidence for this lost chapter has been hiding in plain sight, in verses we read but rarely comprehend. Consider the words God speaks to Job from the whirlwind. In Job chapter 38, God asks, "Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth, while the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy?" Stop and think about that. Who were these sons of God? Adam had not yet been formed. This was a celestial audience, a heavenly host, witnessing a creation that existed before the Garden of Eden. They were there. They saw it all. But their joy did not last. The prophets Isaiah and Ezekiel give us terrifying glimpses into what happened next. In Isaiah chapter 14, we read of a brilliant being, a morning star, who sought to exalt his throne above the stars of God. In Ezekiel chapter 28, we see a guardian cherub perfect in beauty, who walked in Eden, the garden of God, upon the holy mountain. This was not Adam's Eden. This was an original, celestial paradise, and its anointed protector fell because of pride. This was not merely a spiritual fall. It was a cosmic war, and the original earth was its battlefield. The rebellion of this mighty being and his followers is what plunged creation into ruin, turning it into the dark, watery chaos we find in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. The story was not rewritten, it was broken. The history of this first earth, its magnificent ruler, and his cataclysmic fall was deemed too terrible, too complex for the simple narrative of Adam's sin. It was a truth hidden to protect us. Until now. The evidence of this lost history was not misplaced by time. It was removed. For centuries we have trusted that the books of our Bible are the complete and final Word of God. But the truth is more complex. Ancient councils and scribes made difficult choices, deciding which texts would form the canon and which would be cast aside, labeled as apocrypha or hidden writings. The question you must ask yourself is, why? What truth was so dangerous that it had to be buried? The answer lies in traditions that predate the Christian church itself. Ancient rabbinic commentaries, like the Midrash, whisper of a profound secret, that God created and destroyed several worlds before He created ours. This was not a failure of God, but a testament to His divine patience. These were not physical planets, but ages, epochs ruled by spiritual principles and beings that ultimately fell into chaos. This knowledge was guarded, deemed too complex for a simple understanding of sin and redemption. It was easier to start the story with Adam. Simpler, cleaner, but it was not the whole story. These whispers are given form in texts like the Book of Jubilees, sometimes called the Lesser Genesis. This ancient work was considered sacred by many early Jewish and Christian communities. It presents a history of creation, told from the perspective of an angel, revealing a timeline that begins long before the 7 days of Genesis. It speaks of classes of angels and celestial beings who existed in the first creation, whose duties and subsequent failures are directly tied to the corruption of the physical world. This wasn't just a spiritual fall in heaven. It was an event that left creation itself broken, void, and covered in a deep, dark water. You see, these texts do not contradict Genesis, they complete it. They provide the missing context for why a perfect God would begin His work in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2 by hovering over a world already in ruins. It wasn't the beginning of the story, it was the beginning of a great restoration. The deliberate exclusion of these accounts protected a simpler narrative, but it cost us the true scale of God's redemptive plan. If the story of Adam is not about the first sin, but about the first act of divine recovery, then what does that reveal about the true nature of the evil he was meant to overcome? So what did this lost world look like? Before the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters, there was a world teeming with life, but not as we know it. This was the original earth, the jewel of God's first creation. And it was ruled by beings of immense power and wisdom, the celestial sons of God, who shouted for joy at its foundation. These were not men of flesh and blood. They were governors of a spiritual kingdom made manifest, tasked with maintaining a perfect harmony between the heavens and the earth. This was the age of the primordial watchers, a time when the veil between realms was thin and God's glory shone directly upon His creation. But this perfect order was not to last. The rebellion that began in the heart of the morning star, the anointed cherub, did not remain a heavenly affair. It spilled over into the physical realm. His pride became a contagion, a spiritual plague that infected the very dominion he was meant to protect. This was the First Great War, a spiritual conflict so violent that its shockwaves tore through the fabric of reality. The harmony was shattered. The perfect frequencies of creation were thrown into a deafening chaos. This was not a simple fall from grace. It was an act of cosmic treason that aimed to uncreate what God had made perfect. The result of this war is described with chilling precision in Genesis chapter 1 verse 2. The earth became without form and void. This was not its original state. This was the aftermath of a cataclysm. The deep, dark waters that covered everything were not primordial soup. They were the remnants of a divine judgment, a cosmic flood meant to cleanse the wreckage of that first corrupted world. The prophet Jeremiah saw a vision of this exact scene, a land with no man, darkened heavens and trembling mountains. He was not seeing the future. He was being shown a vision of the forgotten past, the true state of the world, before the great restoration began. The omission of this history changes everything we thought we knew. It means that the 7 days of creation were not an act of making something from nothing, but an act of divine reclamation. God was not starting with a blank canvas. He was restoring a battlefield. It also means that the serpent in the garden was not a new threat. He was the defeated ruler of the previous world order, an ancient enemy already present when Adam took his first breath. Adam was placed in Eden, not as the first king, but as the first soldier in a war that had been raging for ages. Hiding this truth protected a simpler narrative of sin, but it cost us the true, breathtaking scale of God's redemptive power. For centuries, the story has been simple. Adam was the first man. Eden was a perfect paradise. His sin was the first sin, the one that broke the world. It is a powerful, linear narrative of creation, fall, and redemption. But this version, the one taught in every Sunday school, stands in stark contrast to the echoes of a much older, far more complex history. The story we've uncovered is not about a world broken by a single act of disobedience. It is the story of a world already in ruins and a man created to be its first restorer. So why was this history concealed? Why would the ancient fathers of the faith choose to remove the first chapter of creation? The answer is rooted in a desire to protect. They feared that a story of a pre-Adamic world, of fallen celestial princes and a cosmic war, would create more questions than it answered. It could introduce doubt. If God's first creation with its powerful angelic rulers could fall so catastrophically, what hope did frail humanity have? For the sake of a clear and simple gospel, that sin entered through one man, Adam, and salvation comes through one man, Christ, the deeper, more chaotic prequel was intentionally set aside. It was a truth deemed too heavy for the common believer to carry. This was not a passive forgetting, it was an active suppression. As early church councils gathered to debate which texts would form the Holy Scripture we know today, they made deliberate choices. Books like the Book of Jubilees and the Book of Enoch, which detailed the histories of these earlier ages and the failures of angelic beings, were systematically marginalized. They were labeled Apocrypha, the hidden away texts. The question we must ask is, were they hidden because they were false? Or because the truth they contained was too staggering, too disruptive to the simple narrative needed to build a global faith? By removing this context, the story of Adam was fundamentally changed. He was no longer a restorer stepping onto a battlefield. He became a fragile figure who brought ruin to a perfect world. This simplified the problem of evil, but at a great cost. It robbed us of the true scale of God's redemptive plan, which did not begin in a garden, but in the ruins of a world that had already been lost. Hiding this truth didn't protect God's sovereignty. It limited our understanding of its breathtaking scope. It transformed a story of cosmic restoration into a simple tale of human failure. This is not just ancient history. This is the missing key to understanding our own spiritual lives. If Adam was placed in a world already scarred by a cosmic rebellion, then the story of humanity is not about a sudden fall from perfection. It is about God enlisting us into an ongoing war of restoration. This truth changes everything. It means that God's plan was never a simple reaction to one man's mistake. It has always been a grand, sweeping campaign to reclaim a creation that was stolen long before we arrived. Perhaps you have felt it your entire life, a sense that the spiritual battle described in the Bible is far older, far deeper than we are told. A feeling that the simple answers offered are not enough to explain the profound darkness that grips the world. This is not a failure of your faith. It is the stirring of a spirit that is ready for a deeper truth. This knowledge was not meant to be hidden forever. It was preserved for a generation that would be strong enough to comprehend it, a generation that seeks more than milk, but the strong meat of the Word. In a world filled with superficial faith and convenient interpretations, this revelation demands a more vigilant spirit. It explains why evil seems so entrenched, so ancient. We are not fighting the consequences of a single sin in a garden. We are standing on the front lines of a war that has raged for eons. The enemy we face is not a recent foe, but a defeated king still trying to cling to a dominion he lost before the first sunrise of Genesis. This understanding strips away the comfortable illusions and calls us to a more sober, more powerful walk with God. Your personal struggles, your prayers, your moments of spiritual warfare, they are not isolated events. They are part of this magnificent, cosmic story of reclamation. You are not just a saved soul waiting for heaven. You are an active participant in God's plan to restore His perfect creation. This hidden history does not diminish the cross. It magnifies it. Christ's victory was not just over Adam's sin, but over a rebellion that began in the depths of eternity. And we, as his followers, are now agents of that final, glorious restoration. But if the story of humanity is one of restoration, it begs a far deeper question. What was the original blueprint? What was the world being restored to nourish? The ancient writings, those deemed too profound for the common narrative, speak of a creation even before the one ruled by the celestial princes. They speak of the primordial light. This was not the light of the sun or the stars, but a divine illumination that was the very substance of God's first creation. The command, "Let there be light," was not the creation of something new, but the return of something that had been lost in the cataclysm. This original light was focused in one place, the first Eden. Not the garden planted for Adam, but its celestial source, the holy mountain of God, described by the prophet Ezekiel. This was a garden of pure energy, a nexus point where the glory of heaven was made manifest in a perfect, untarnished creation. It was the blueprint of perfection, the divine memory that God would use as a pattern for the world. He was reclaiming. Adam's Eden was an echo, a shadow of this magnificent, forgotten paradise. When the rebellion of the morning star shattered that first world, what happened to this primordial light? Darkness, the Bible tells us, covered the face of the deep. But divine light cannot be destroyed. It can only be concealed. The most ancient traditions teach that God did not allow this holy light to be extinguished by the chaos. Instead, he withdrew it. He hid it away, preserving its purity, until a time when creation would be ready to receive its glory once more. This reveals a secret that changes our understanding of the entire Old Testament. If the most powerful creative substance in the universe, the original light of creation, was hidden from the world after the first fall, where did God put it? Was it sealed away in a secret location, entrusted to a sacred object passed down through the patriarchs? Or was it concealed in the very bloodline he chose to bring forth the final redemption? The answer has been waiting, hidden in plain sight for those with eyes to see. This hidden history redefines the very nature of God himself. For centuries we have seen him primarily as the Creator, the one who spoke a perfect world into existence only to see it ruined by human weakness. But the truth revealed between the lines of Genesis is far more profound. God is not just the Creator, he is the great restorer. The 7 days of Genesis were not the first act of creation, but the first act of a grand reclamation project. He did not step into a void, but onto a battlefield, bringing light back to a realm that had been plunged into darkness by an ancient, celestial treason. This single truth changes the purpose of humanity. Adam was not a fragile king in a perfect paradise, destined to fail. He was the first soldier in a divine recovery mission, placed in a restored sanctuary called Eden, as God's first foothold in a world still under the shadow of its fallen prince. Our existence is not an accident that followed a mistake. It is God's deliberate, strategic answer to a rebellion that shook the foundations of the heavens. We were created for the conflict, designed to carry the light of God into the lingering darkness. Why was this knowledge suppressed? Because it complicates the simple narrative of sin and salvation. But for those who have always felt that the story was deeper, this truth does not destroy faith. It forges it in fire. It explains the pervasive, ancient nature of evil in a way that Adam's single transgression cannot. It provides the missing context for the spiritual warfare described by the apostles, revealing it as a conflict that has been raging since before time as we know it. This is not a truth that weakens the foundations of belief. It builds them upon the bedrock of a cosmic history, revealing a God whose redemptive plan is older, grander, and more magnificent than we were ever taught. Therefore, the story of the Bible is not simply about recovering from Adam's fall. It is the epic saga of God reclaiming his entire creation from an ancient enemy. Every patriarch, every prophet, and every miracle is a strategic move in this cosmic war of restoration. This hidden history does not make your faith smaller. It makes you a part of a story that is infinitely larger. It confirms that your spirit was right to search for something more, for a truth that honors the awesome restorative power of the God you serve. And so we arrive at the final, most heavily guarded secret. The plan of redemption did not begin in the Garden of Eden. It did not begin with the prophecies of Isaiah or the lineage of David. The Apostle Paul tells us in his letter to the Ephesians that we were chosen in him before the foundation of the world. Think on those words. Before the restored world of Genesis was even spoken into being, the answer to the cosmic rebellion had already been established. God was not reacting to a future failure, he was executing an eternal victory plan. With this truth, the first chapter of Genesis is no longer a simple creation story. It becomes a divine war manual. Let there be light is the first command of a heavenly general reclaiming lost ground. The separation of the waters is the establishment of a beachhead. The creation of man is the deployment of a new kind of soldier, made in God's own image, to govern and restore a world that had been stolen. The entire narrative is transformed from a story of creation into a story of recreation, of a divine reclamation project of breathtaking scale. This is why the Bible speaks of a second Adam. The first Adam was the initial restorer, who tragically fell to the same ancient enemy that caused the first ruin. But his failure did not thwart the eternal plan. It only set the stage for the true king, the ultimate restorer. Jesus Christ was not merely the solution to human sin. He was God's answer to the cosmic treason that occurred in the depths of eternity. His sacrifice on the cross was a victory blow that echoed back through all of history, paying a debt far older than the Garden of Eden. He is the Lamb that was slain from the foundation of the world. This hidden history does not replace the Bible you know and love. It illuminates it. It gives depth to the shadows and reveals the true, magnificent scope of God's sovereignty. You are not a descendant of a failed experiment. You are a child of the great restorer, enlisted in the final chapter of a war that has already been won. The answers were always there, waiting between the lines, preserved for those with the courage to look beyond the veil of tradition and see the story as it was always meant to be understood. A story not of a paradise lost, but of a kingdom being eternally reclaimed. Take a moment and let this truth settle in your spirit. The story of our faith is not a simple line drawn in the sand of a garden. It is a timeless epic, a story of cosmic restoration in which you play a vital part. This knowledge does not diminish your role, it magnifies it. You are not just a descendant of the fallen, you are a chosen soldier in the army of the great restorer, carrying his light into a world still shadowed by a war that began before time. For centuries, these deeper truths were intentionally hidden, sealed away by men who believed they were protecting a fragile faith. But we are living in a time of profound revelation. The seals are being broken, and the forgotten chapters are being brought into the light for a generation that is hungry for more than simple stories. You are not here by accident. Your desire for deeper answers led you to this very moment, to a truth that has been waiting patiently to be rediscovered. If this revelation burns in your heart and awakens your spirit, we ask you to partner with us in spreading this light. Show your support by liking this video, subscribing to our channel, and activating the notification bell so you never miss another piece of this divine puzzle. And now, we have a new members area. By becoming a member, you bless this work and empower us to continue producing, edifying, and revealing content like this for seekers around the world. We are a global community, united by our search for the hidden truths of God's Word. To see how far this message is traveling, please let us know in the comments what city or country you are watching from. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the forgotten history of our faith. Until next time, may you walk in the light of this magnificent, restored truth.